Ex-wife cheated and left, but loses it when she sees me happy with my new girlfriend. When my wife, Sarah, walked out of my life, she left behind a trail of destruction. At the time, I couldn't comprehend the depth of betrayal she had inflicted upon me. We'd been together for 7 years, and I believed we were happy. However, life has a way of shattering illusions, and I was about to embark on a journey of pain, self-discovery, and ultimately, revenge. It all started with a series of late nights. Sarah claimed she was working overtime to help her company meet deadlines. I trusted her implicitly, never questioning her motives. She was always a hard worker, dedicated to her career, and I admired her for it. Our life together seemed perfect on the surface, but beneath the facade, cracks began to form. I had no idea at the time, but those long hours weren't just about work. In the beginning, I chalked it up to her commitment. But soon, I began noticing subtle changes in her behavior. She became more distant, her laughter felt hollow, and her gaze would often drift elsewhere when we were together. The intimate moments we once shared began to fade into the background as she grew more absorbed in her own world. I dismissed these feelings at first, telling myself I was just being paranoid. After all, nothing substantial had changed. She was still coming home at the end of each night, still sharing her day with me, albeit in a more distant way. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I became suspicious, and like most men in my position, I started to question my instincts. Was I being unreasonable? Was I overthinking things? My mind spiraled, unable to shake the feeling that something was amiss. One night, I decided to surprise her at work with dinner. My intentions were simple: to show her I cared and appreciated her hard work. I wanted to remind her of the connection we once shared, to reignite that spark between us. As I arrived at her office building, I saw her stepping out with a man I didn't recognize. They were laughing, their bodies close, and the way he placed his hand on the small of her back felt too intimate for comfort. My heart sank in my chest as the world around me seemed to blur. I watched them walk to a car, where they shared a lingering glance before the door closed behind them. In that moment, I realized that everything I believed in had been shattered in an instant. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I went home, waiting for her to return. The uncertainty gnawed at me, but I couldn't bring myself to accuse her without knowing for sure. When she finally came home, she smelled of a cologne that wasn't mine. It wasn't subtle. It was strong, unmistakable, and it was a scent I had never known her to wear. My heart pounded in my chest as I asked her how her night had gone. She lied effortlessly, telling me she'd been in meetings all evening. She sounded convincing, but I knew better. My trust in her began to crumble, and with it, any semblance of peace I had left. But I wasn't ready to accuse her outright. The man I loved, the woman I thought I knew, couldn't be capable of this kind of betrayal, could she? So, I waited. I watched, and I became a shadow of my former self. Every moment felt like a ticking time bomb, each second driving me further into paranoia and suspicion. My mind raced constantly, replaying that scene over and over, searching for signs I had missed, clues I had ignored. Over the next few weeks, I became a different person. I started checking her phone when she wasn't looking, but she had become meticulous about deleting messages and call logs. She had covered her tracks. Her behavior only confirmed my fears. Every day felt like a new layer of deception, a new betrayal uncovered. But I couldn't bring myself to face the truth. One day, While she was in the shower, I came across an email account she'd been using to communicate with someone named Mark. The content of their exchanges left no room for doubt. She was having an affair. They spoke in private code, referencing late-night meetings and secret rendezvous. The words jumped off the screen, each one a dagger to my heart. How had I been so blind? The life I thought I was living, the love I thought we shared, had all been a lie. Confronting her was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I had never imagined that I'd be in a position like this, that I would be looking at the woman I loved and hearing words from her that I couldn't have fathomed. When I presented the evidence, she didn't deny it. Instead, she looked at me with an air of defiance and said, "I haven't been happy for a long time." Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. How could she have been unhappy when I'd done everything to make her happy? How could she betray me so completely? Her admission was the final blow. Sarah moved out shortly after our confrontation. The divorce proceedings were swift, and she seemed eager to start her new life with Mark. I, on the other hand, was left to pick up the pieces of my shattered heart and pride. The anger inside me was overwhelming, but I didn't know what to do with it. Friends and family offered their support, but I felt utterly alone. They could never understand the depth of the betrayal I had experienced, the sense of betrayal that gnawed at my soul. My nights were sleepless, filled with thoughts of what I could have done differently. What had I missed? What could I have said to stop this? I spiraled into a deep depression, losing weight, withdrawing from the world, and spending endless nights in tears. It was during one of these sleepless nights that a close friend, Daniel, gave me the wake-up call I desperately needed. "You're letting her win," he said bluntly. "She's out there living her life, and you're here drowning in misery. Get up and fight back." His words struck a chord. I realized I'd been giving Sarah power over my life even after she'd left. I had been so consumed by the pain of betrayal that I'd allowed it to define me. But I was stronger than that. I had to take control back. I started focusing on myself. I hit the gym, began eating healthy, and sought therapy to address the emotional trauma. Slowly but surely, I started feeling like myself again. I even enrolled in a business course I'd been putting off for years. It was during this time that I discovered a passion for entrepreneurship. The idea of building something from the ground up, something that was entirely mine, became my new focus. I poured my energy into learning, growing, and redefining who I was without Sarah by my side. But the deeper I delved into my personal growth, the more I realized that I couldn't let Sarah get away with what she had done. Not just for me, but for the man I had become. I had been living for her for so long, and now I had to live for me. I needed to prove to myself that I could come out of this stronger, more successful, and ultimately, that I could make her regret walking away. It was in this space of transformation that I found my true strength. I had gone from a man broken by betrayal to one who was ready to rebuild his life on his terms. I wasn't just going to heal, I was going to thrive. Every workout, every class, every business decision was a step toward becoming the man I was meant to be. And as I did, the thought of revenge began to take shape. But it wasn't about hurting her. It was about showing her that I could move on and build a life without her. It was about showing Sarah that I was stronger than she ever thought possible. I had spent months grieving, but now it was time to make her regret her choices. Not because I wanted her back, but because I wanted to prove to myself that I was better than the man she thought she could walk all over. My journey into the business world had been anything but easy, but what transpired in the years that followed was more than I could have imagined. 2 years had passed since I decided to take the plunge into something I wasn't entirely sure would work. To say it was a risk would be an understatement. I was a man broken by the betrayal of a woman I had once loved, unsure of who I was or where my life was going. But somehow, despite all of that, my venture took off faster than I'd expected. I had gone from a man who couldn't even see a way out of the dark days that followed my divorce to someone who was thriving building a business that not only brought in the money, but more importantly, gave me a sense of purpose. I found something. I had lost confidence. Confidence not just in my abilities as an entrepreneur, but in myself as a person. I could look in the mirror and feel proud of the man I was becoming. It wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of my past tried to drag me back down. There were moments when I questioned whether I was truly healed. But with each small success, with each victory, I became stronger. My friends noticed the change in me. "You look happier than I've ever seen you," they would say. And for the first time in years, I believed them. I felt like I was finally on solid ground. But life, as it often does, has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. Just as I was beginning to feel invincible, Sarah reappeared in my life, out of nowhere. It started with an email, just a simple, unassuming, "Hi, how have you been?" At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake, a wrong recipient. Why would she reach out to me after everything that had happened? After everything she had done? But curiosity got the best of me. I clicked on the email, reread it several times, and then, after much deliberation, decided to reply. My response was polite, but distant, cautious, and certainly not welcoming. I didn't want to get tangled in whatever emotional web she was trying to weave. The messages that followed were a series of revelations I never saw coming. Sarah was no longer the woman who had left me heartbroken and betrayed. Instead, she was someone who seemed lost, broken, and humbled. She told me about Mark, the man she had left me for. The man who, as it turned out, had cheated on her. She explained how devastated she felt, how he had torn apart the life she thought she'd built with him, and how humiliated she was by the betrayal. There was a strange sense of satisfaction, of validation, that I felt as I read her words. The woman who had shattered my heart was now the one picking up the pieces of her own life. But more than that, there was something else, a deep-seated desire for closure, for something more than just the ghost of her haunting me. I wasn't looking for reconciliation, but I couldn't ignore the possibility that this could be my chance to not only heal, but also to take control of the situation once and for all. To set the record straight, to get my closure, and maybe, just maybe, deliver a bit of poetic justice. I agreed to meet Sarah for coffee. When I saw her for the first time in years, it was like stepping back into a past I had long since buried. Her eyes widened in what I could only interpret as regret. She took in the changes in me, how much I'd grown, how much more confident I seemed, how my posture now reflected the man I had become. She commented on how different I looked, how happy I seemed, how successful I had become. There was a hint of admiration in her voice, and it was almost as if she wanted to be part of my life again. But I wasn't going to make it that easy for her. I played along, pretending to entertain the idea of rekindling something between us. I was aware of her vulnerability now, of her desire to turn the page and start fresh. She spoke about her struggles, how hard the past few years had been for her, how much she missed the life we had shared. She expressed her regrets and her apologies, as if I could somehow forgive her and let the past slide. I listened, feigning sympathy, but inside, I was reminding myself of all the pain she had caused me, all the broken promises, all the lies, and all the ways she had hurt me. I kept the emotional distance, refusing to let myself slip back into old habits, refusing to let her back into my life without making her fully understand what she had taken from me. Weeks passed, and our meetings became more frequent. Each time, I let her believe there might be a chance for us. It was like playing a game where I held all the cards, and I wasn't going to let her get away with what she'd done. As she opened up to me about her pain and her regrets, I took it all in. But in the back of my mind, I knew this was about more than just Sarah. This was about me. This was my chance to close that chapter for good, to put an end to the toxic cycle of self-doubt and hurt that she had left me with. Then came the moment of reckoning. I had been planning it for weeks, crafting the letter that would serve as my final word on the matter. It wasn't something I took lightly. I wasn't interested in revenge, but I needed Sarah to understand the full impact of her actions. During one of our meetings, I handed her the letter. It was neatly typed, every word carefully chosen to convey the message I needed her to hear. The letter detailed everything I had been through after our divorce, how I had struggled to pick myself up and rebuild my life, how the pain of losing her had nearly broken me. But it also showed the person I had become, the man who, despite it all, had emerged stronger. I ended the letter with a message that, to me, was more powerful than anything I could have said face to face. I'm grateful for the lessons you taught me, but I've moved on. I hope you find the strength to do the same. Her reaction was immediate. I watched her face crumple as she read the words. The woman who had once torn my heart apart was now the one who seemed to be falling apart. She tried to argue, to convince me that we could start over, that we could find a way back to each other. But I stood firm, resolute in my decision. Walking away from her that day felt like shedding the last remnants of the pain she had caused me. I had finally closed the door to that chapter. I had taken control of my story. Today, I stand in a much better place. I've come to understand that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, it means not letting the past control your present or future. Sarah's betrayal was a painful chapter, but it was also the catalyst for my growth. It taught me how resilient I could be, how strong I was, and how important it is to surround yourself with people who lift you up, not tear you down. Since then, I've found love again, this time with someone who values me for who I am. Together, we are building a life filled with trust, support, and mutual respect. It's everything I had hoped for, everything I thought I had lost. And for the first time in a long time, I know that I deserve it. As for Sarah, I hear bits and pieces of her life, still struggling to put the pieces back together. Part of me feels sorry for her, but another part of me understands that she is facing the consequences of her own choices. Life, in its own way, has a way of balancing the scales, and I'm living proof that no matter how dark the moments may be, you can rise above them. In the end, I've learned that with perseverance, with self-respect, and with the right support, you can emerge stronger, more fulfilled, and more confident than you ever thought possible. And as for Sarah, well, she's no longer the one who holds the power in my life. That power lies with me where it belongs,